Hi BookTube, welcome to a fiction review, and today's review is sponsored by the letter H. A few days ago, I discovered that there is now a little free library just a short walking distance away from where I live. It's contained inside one of those English old-fashioned telephone boxes. Here's a photo. Imagine how excited I was. So I opened the door and I stepped inside to see what books were on the shelves. And the first one that caught my eye was a copy of the novel that we're going to review today, the same 1993 paperback edition that I owned. And I wondered who used to own this library copy. How long did it take them to read it? And what did they think of it? Today we are reviewing Miss Smilla's Feeling for Snow by Peter Høeg, translated from Danish by Tiina Nunnally, whose pen name is Felicity David. Inside the book that will be shortened to F. David. Book was published in 1993 and is 410 pages long. Also, I should mention the typeface, at least on the 1993 edition, is a little on the small side, and the text rather close together. So you are getting, I guess you could say you're getting your money's worth for the 410 pages. For those who worry about page numbers, it means that those 410 pages will feel like 410 pages. And this is a crime novel. It is one of those Nordic noir books. In fact, one of the first that became the inspiration for the term. And as I said at the beginning of my video, this is book number 2 of 26 in my alphabet soup TBR. The author's name begins with the letter H, so that's the letters A and H out of the way. We don't know a great deal about the author, Peter Høeg. He's managed, and I think this is probably a wise move on his part, to preserve a lot of his privacy. He was born in 1957 in Copenhagen. He studied at the University of Copenhagen, got his master's degree in literature. He got it in stages. In between his bachelor's and his master's degree, he worked as various things. He was an actor, I understand he was a ballet dancer, also a sailor working on the yachts owned by wealthy people, which was all good preparation for writing this novel, I think. But his first novel, written in 1988, not many people know. I don't believe it was translated right away into the English. It was A History of Danish Dreams. It was Miss Smilla's Feeling for Snow, which came out in 1993, that established his reputation and his name worldwide. It was named the best book of the year in Time magazine and Entertainment Weekly, and it spent 26 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It was translated into 17 languages, published in 30 different countries. Peter continued to write a new novel about every 2 to 3 years. His final one was The Susan Effect, which was written in 2005. Much has been made about this novel's look at snow and ice and winter weather, so of course the setting will matter. The novel's action in terms of what's happening and also what is being remembered about the past happens in 2 locations, in Copenhagen, in Denmark, and in or off the coast of Greenland. Nordic noir really relies on setting for its atmosphere and for a reflection on our narrator, who is a product of both of these places and who will talk about what those places meant to her, how they have or have not influenced and made her the person that she's become. By reading the book, you will be taught about the peculiar geography and climate of Greenland, which will be unknown, I think, to most people and therefore exotic. The novel contains 2 maps, one on page 2, which is the center of Copenhagen, and then another which is on page 230, and that's a map of Greenland. Now, personally, I felt that both maps belonged to the beginning of the book. It's true that the setting itself of the story doesn't move to Greenland until page 230, but that action doesn't involve any character actually setting foot on any part of Greenland except for one small islet off the west coast. Whereas prior to page 230, the narrator spends a lot of time remembering past experience in various locations in Greenland, and I ended up searching for those places using Google Maps, not realizing that I was going to get a map later on in the book. In terms of time, it seemed to me that the novel was set very much around the time it was published, late 1980s, early 1990s. So there are no mobile phones, fewer computers, more paper records, less security, less public surveillance, which helps our characters greatly. One other aspect of setting I want to mention. A large part of the novel's action occurs on board a ship, a large ship, a ship that can carry freight and deal with Arctic conditions. I know absolutely nothing about ships. Peter Høeg clearly knows a great deal, especially from his experience as a sailor, and he described the boat the way one experienced sailor might speak to another experienced sailor. All very well, but unfortunately for me, this meant that I could not muster a visual image of the various decks and compartments, and I felt very lost and disoriented while I was reading that part of the novel. So what I really needed, to be honest, more than the maps, which I could find online, was internal diagrams of that ship. Maybe newer copies of Miss Smilla's Feeling for Snow have this. Does anybody happen to know? If so, please leave a comment. Narration is first person, and our narrator is Smilla Jasperson. She's 36 years old. Her mother was a Greenland Inuit and her father a Danish entrepreneur. She's had an interesting growing up, and though she lives in Denmark, she remains somewhat aloof from the habits and conventions of Northern European society. She remembers a very different way of living and seeing the world, and to others, particularly her father, she retains a kind of wildness, like a stray cat who will accept gifts of food but will not enter the house or allow itself to be touched. On page 121, Smilla actually says about herself, "As a rule, I swim against the current, but on certain mornings, such as today, I have enough surplus energy for surrender." Her voice is distinctive, at times possibly too distinctive, but I'll talk about that in the rabbit hole. One thing I noticed regarding characterization in Miss Smilla's Feeling for Snow is that Smilla herself is very carefully drawn, a very interesting portrait, what a reader might expect from a character-driven literary piece of fiction. But other characters, by comparison, they're more typical of what you would find in a genre crime novel. They're sketches. They never really become fully drawn out, or they're a trope. There's a villain with connections to World War II, Nazi Germany. There's a single woman who's been married to her job for 40 years. Mainly, the characters exist as sources of information for Smilla Jasperson as she searches for answers to the mystery of the book. Smilla's not a social creature, and even her romantic interest feels largely unknown by the end of the book. If you made a word cloud with all the character names, and the ones that were more drawn out had bigger letters, you'd find that Smilla's name would be so large it would use up most of the space in the picture, and the other characters around, their typeface might be so small it would be hard to read. Regarding representation, on page 28, Smilla relates an Inuit origin story, which I'm going to quote because it's quite interesting. "In the beginning, the world was inhabited only by two men who were both great sorcerers. Since they wanted to multiply, one of them transformed his body in such a way that he could give birth, and then the two of them created many children." And throughout the novel, there are these insights into Greenland Inuit language, the cultural differences that there may be between them and Canadian Inuit, and a sense of the tensions between the indigenous Greenlander population and their Danish colonial government. It piqued my interest, and I went looking for recommended reading, and I can give you one book that seems to be put forward more than others, and I think could set me up with some additional knowledge, and that is This Cold Heaven by Greta Ehrlich. Problematic content. I think it's true that one needs a certain constitution, that's a good word actually, to read Nordic noir. It's good to be in a good place. I've read Stieg Larsson's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo trilogy. I've read a couple of Henning Menkel's crime novels. The settings always seem bleak. Whether or not it's true, it always seems that the action takes place in the winter. The characters are very ordinary in appearance. They're usually troubled in their personal relationships. Violence happens, and there's details about the violence given in a very matter-of-fact sort of way. There's substance abuse, there's alcohol addiction, that's very common. Children and women suffer manipulation and abuse. So whether it is because of the violence or the bleak settings, I find with Nordic noir, I can never quite relax. Even if the author paints a short scene that is peaceful or tender, I found myself as a reader always distrusting those moments when I read them. I was expecting all the while for something horrible to come in and interrupt. Every event feels ill-fated. But all this atmospheric creation, it can be or can seem a little exaggerated, a little removed from the real. And you know how if you watch a stage play, you might be absorbed in the suspense, you might feel fear. I understand the stage version of Woman in Black is absolutely terrifying. And yet, even in terror, our brains retain the knowledge that we're witnessing theater. And for some readers, having dark experiences in fiction is cathartic. It works to provide an antidote to their anxiety about the real world, because in fiction, you always come out of the experience safe yourself. And I know this because the person who watches television finds Nordic noir in print or on television relaxing. I don't always, and some readers never do. You doubtless know where you fit on that spectrum of comfort, and so you can decide whether Miss Smilla's Feeling for Snow is for you, because it does contain all the problematic content that I mentioned at the beginning of this section. Rabbit hole time. Miss Smilla's Feeling for Snow, when it came out, was marketed as a crime novel, and it has the genre shape of a crime novel. It opens with the crime committed, and our narrator is acting as a motivated but unqualified investigator. We've had those before, haven't we? Miss Marple types, able to obtain the information that she needs by unconventional means and perturbing local law enforcement who do not want her to be meddling. This is true for Smilla Jasperson. She perseveres in spite the drawbacks and the dangers. And as can happen in crime or thriller novels, the protagonist can also be a little bit Teflon coated, can't they? Always in the right place at the right time, or never in the wrong place without a convenient escape route or a distraction that rewards them just enough time to slip away. Smilla Jasperson is like this, right? She has more than her usual share of good luck and good timing. What made Miss Smilla's Feeling for Snow a little bit different is that the crime novel shape is quilted. That's the best word I can use. Quilted with features that are more typical of a character-driven literary work. Smilla is not talkative, but she thinks and she remembers a great deal. And so the pace of the novel is decelerated by all these regular downloads from her brain, varying between a paragraph to several pages sometimes. And this is inserted between the forward-moving aspects of the crime-solving plot, if you will. Now, by page 230, this is where the map of Greenland appears in the book. Investigations have reached a critical point where it matters to leave Copenhagen immediately. Smilla travels by sea on a ship with a very small crew and fewer passengers. The journey from there to Western Greenland lasts 160 rather claustrophobic pages. This is a challenging interlude in a number of ways because it distorts the crime novel shape of the book a great deal. Smilla acquires a few more pieces of information on her journey and sufficient allies among the crew to enhance her Teflon coating. But 160 pages is a lot of reading for a very little reward. So for anyone who loves crime fiction for its pace and its page-turning suspense, it will be that section of the book, I think, that may prove challenging. I felt a strange confusion as I was reading. My brain didn't really know, how is it supposed to deal with this text? What was it reading? If it was a literary novel, then I wanted to criticize the author for making Smilla uncharacteristically adept at too many things, particularly going without food and sleep without any effect on her detection ability. If the book was a genre crime novel, well, okay, then the Teflon coating was fine, I accepted it, but it was moving too slowly. And the time Smilla spent remembering her childhood or carefully searching every inch of the ship at 2 a.m. were of little or no relevance to the plot. In addition to that, there was Smilla's very distinctive voice, or I say that, most of the time, it's very terse. It's as if language was just an assembly job that she needed to do, like making a sandwich or laying a brick wall. You put the right things in the right place, in the right order, and there you are done. And what you have made is clear. Occasionally, you find a switch flips, and Smilla has this fit of poetic sensibility. She suddenly runs lyrical and descriptive, and it's very intense and sudden, and then it's done. I was unsure when these episodes happened whether I was still hearing Smilla or whether the author had not paid attention and had accidentally broken through with his own voice. And I had a similar feeling when Smilla was on board the ship traveling to Greenland. She admits that she has a fear of open water, yet she's fluent in nautical terms, actually fluent in a number of specialities which are either not explained at all, or they're explained at the point when that expertise comes in so handy. Early in the novel, we learn that Smilla was a difficult child, right? She refused to attend school regularly, she frequently ran away, and she only finished schooling because her wealthy father paid for private tutors. And yet, what is not revealed until as late as page 315 and 339 is that Smilla must have found her passion at some point, became a qualified glaciologist with published papers on the elasticity of ice, which are being used by the baddie in this novel as part of his criminal master plan. Of course, it's plausible for a child who struggled to engage with institutional education to find later on that they've discovered an interest in a particular subject and they return to school with the necessary motivation to succeed. Yes, that happens a lot. But what's less plausible is that this part of Smilla's story just remains completely untold until it happens to line up with a plot point. And this is why the less structured literary shape combined so awkwardly with genre convention. Either Smilla's memories are random, as they would be in literary fiction, or they are conveniently timed, as they might be in genre fiction. But the novel tries to do a bit of both, and that does not make it unreadable. It doesn't make it unenjoyable, but for some readers, 30% of the people who reviewed this book on Goodreads gave it 3 stars or less. There were comments about this strange combination of beautiful prose and forensic description coming alongside Smilla's attempts at being a larger-than-life thriller protagonist. I think one reviewer called her Jane Bond. And that's really all I have to say about the book. What I hope I have not done is put anybody off who thinks they might want to try Miss Smilla's Feeling for Snow. Because yes, 37% of people gave the book 3 stars or less, 63% gave it 4 or 5 stars, and a lot of reviewers said that Smilla Jasperson was such an absorbing character that they would continue to remember her after they finished the book. And that is true for me also. She is memorable. She's a quirky Uberfrau who mostly swims against the current, and I did like her very much. Okay, one announcement before I close. 1 week from today, the channel, Heather Reads, reaches its 3rd birthday. Yeah, I don't have any grand event planned. I don't want to do a Q&A because, you can ask me questions anytime if you really, really wanted to, and I try to answer. But I do have something to say, so look out for that in a few days' time. In the meantime, everybody, have good reading and take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.